"Don't waste your money on me," said the Apache slave. But the cowboy paid and took her home. The sun was slowly climbing over the dusty horizon, casting a golden light across the small frontier town. The streets were narrow and lined with wooden buildings, their paint peeling under years of harsh wind and sun. This town had a kind of quiet desperation about it, as if the people living there were holding on to whatever little they had just to survive. Among the hustle and bustle of traders, cowboys, and travelers, there was a young Apache woman moving cautiously through the shadows. She was small, but her presence had a quiet strength. Her dark eyes, wary and alert, scanned every corner as if expecting trouble to leap out at any moment. She had learned long ago that trust could be dangerous, and every encounter was a risk. Her name was not spoken aloud often, and she had stopped introducing herself to anyone a long time ago.
Life had taught her to keep quiet, to avoid drawing attention. She had been taken from her family when she was a child and forced into servitude by traders who saw people like her as property rather than human beings.
Every day she worked hard, performing tasks that drained her body and spirit, yet she held on to a spark inside her, a small piece of herself that refused to break. Breaths. She knew the world could be cruel, but she also believed that somewhere there was a chance for freedom, for safety, and perhaps even for kindness. The town was beginning to wake up, the wooden sidewalks creaking under the steps of people moving about their business. Merchants shouted about their wares, selling tools, clothes, and food. The smell of horses and dust filled the air. The young woman moved quietly, her hands carrying a basket of small items she had been tasked with selling. She knew she had to be careful. Any wrong glance, any hint of defiance, could bring punishment. And yet she walked with a quiet dignity, refusing to let fear completely take over her posture or her spirit. Across the street, a cowboy had arrived on horseback, dust clinging to his boots and the brim of his hat pulled low to shade his eyes. He was a man used to long rides and hard work, with muscles honed from years of labor in the sun. His clothes were simple but functional, and there was a calmness about him, a quiet confidence that came from knowing himself and the world he moved through. He was looking for work, hoping to find a steady place in a town that had little to offer strangers. Yet, as he walked through the streets, he noticed something unusual. A young woman being treated roughly by traders, her protests ignored, her body tense with fear. His curiosity turned quickly into concern. The traders were yelling, arguing over the price of the goods she carried. They treated her as though she were nothing more than a burden, a means to make money rather than a human being with feelings or dreams. The young woman tried to pull back, her voice quiet but firm. "Please, don't make me do this. I am not yours to sell like this." Her words were soft, almost lost in the noise of the town, but they were filled with desperation and courage. Break. She had learned to speak only when necessary, yet the situation demanded her voice. The cowboy's eyes narrowed as he watched the scene unfold. He didn't like the cruelty in the traders' actions, nor the way they ignored her humanity. Something stirred in him, a sense of justice, or perhaps empathy.
He knew that what he was witnessing was wrong. He stepped closer, the sound of his boots firm on the wooden sidewalk.
The traders noticed him, a stranger in their town who seemed to care about the affairs of others. One of them sneered, "This doesn't concern you, stranger. Keep moving!" But the cowboy stood his ground, his calm demeanor giving him an air of authority without arrogance.
"It concerns me when someone is being treated like that," he said.
His voice was steady, not loud, but it carried a weight that made the traders pause. The young woman looked up, her eyes widening with a mix of hope and skepticism. She had never encountered anyone who might genuinely care about her well-being. For a moment, there was silence. The town seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing that something unusual was about to happen. The cowboy glanced at the woman, who now looked hesitant and wary, her body tense with the anticipation of either safety or betrayal. He could see the fear in her eyes, the scars of past cruelty, and he felt a strange connection, a recognition of shared humanity. "Bear," she whispered, barely audible. "Don't waste your money on me."
Her words were a warning, not just about the cost of the trader's price, but about the dangers of trusting someone too quickly. She had learned the hard way that kindness could sometimes hide selfish intentions.
But the cowboy didn't turn away. He listened to her words with respect, understanding that they came from a place of fear and experience. He was not seeking to possess or control her. He only wanted to help. "I'm not here for money," he said quietly. "I just want to make sure you're safe." His words were simple, but they carried sincerity. The young woman studied him, her mind racing. Could he be trusted? Could someone really care without expecting something in return? She had no answer, only the faintest hope that maybe, just maybe, this man was different. The traders, sensing the change in dynamics, began to argue among themselves. "Britt, he can't just," one said, but the cowboy held up a hand. "I'm paying the price they ask," he said. "She is free." The words struck her like a shock. Freed. The concept was almost foreign, something she had dreamed of but had never truly known. Freedom was not just walking away from the traders, it was the chance to live her life, make choices, and find safety. She felt a rush of conflicting emotions: fear, hope, disbelief. Could this be real? Could someone truly offer her freedom without strings attached? She hesitated, looking at the cowboy with caution. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to not trust so quickly. Yet there was something in his eyes, a quiet patience and respect, that made her pause, frowned. Slowly she nodded, the first step toward a new life. The traders, seeing the transaction finalized, grumbled but took the money and left, leaving the young woman standing beside the cowboy, unsure of what to do next. She had escaped one kind of captivity, but she knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges.
As they walked together away from the town square, the young woman kept her distance, her posture tense, yet curious.
The cowboy didn't force conversation, understanding that trust had to be earned. He guided her gently, speaking when necessary, explaining simple things about where they were going and what to expect. Each step was cautious, each glance measured, yet with every mile they put between themselves and the traders, a small piece of fear melted away. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth, and with it warming the possibility of a new beginning. By the time they reached the outskirts of the town, a faint smile appeared on her face, almost imperceptible but real. She was beginning to realize that freedom was not just a word, it was something she could feel. The cowboy noticed, offering a nod of encouragement. They still had much to face, many lessons to learn about trust, courage, and survival. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she was in control, where her choices mattered. And for the cowboy, he felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had done the right thing, not for fame or fortune, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The journey had just begun, and though the path ahead was uncertain, there was a sense of hope in the air. The young Apache woman had survived the cruelty of others, and now, perhaps, she could survive the challenges of freedom, with someone by her side who truly respected her.
The world was vast and unpredictable, but for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone.
The town slowly disappeared behind them, swallowed by the dusty horizon, leaving only the endless plains and the occasional rocky outcrop. The cowboy led the young Apache woman along a narrow dirt path that wound through the hills and fields. She stayed close enough to follow, but far enough to keep a safe distance. Every few moments, she would glance back at the town, the place that had been her prison and her danger, and then at the cowboy who walked steadily beside her, calm and patient. Her mind was a storm of emotions: fear, hope, doubt, and a strange sense of relief. Freedom felt strange, almost unreal, and she wondered if she was ready to face it. The cowboy noticed her tension but did not speak too much. He understood that trust could not be rushed. Words could be dangerous if used too soon. Actions, however, spoke louder. As they walked, he offered simple guidance. "There's a small cabin not far from here," he said. "It's safe. You'll have a place to rest, and no one will bother you." She nodded but said nothing. She had learned to listen carefully and speak only when necessary. Her voice had survived years of being ignored or punished, and now it felt fragile, almost like a delicate thread she had to protect. The journey to the cabin was long. The plains stretched endlessly, dotted with wildflowers and small shrubs, but they also held the hidden dangers of snakes, coyotes, and uneven terrain. The young woman walked carefully, her eyes constantly scanning the ground. Every sound made her flinch: twigs snapping underfoot, birds taking flight, the distant howl of an animal. She had learned to survive by staying alert, and now that instinct remained strong. The cowboy understood this instinct. He moved with quiet assurance, never startling her, never forcing her to relax before she was ready. As the sun climbed higher, the young woman began to notice small details about the cowboy. He carried himself with a sense of calm that seemed to absorb the chaos around him. His hands were strong yet careful, able to guide without hurting. Despite of his eyes, shaded under a wide-brimmed hat, observed everything, noting potential dangers and opportunities. She realized slowly that he was someone who had lived with hardship but had chosen not to let it harden him completely. There was a kindness in him that was rare, and it made her wonder if perhaps there were more people like him in the world, people who could care without seeking gain. Despite the quiet beauty of the journey, the young woman could not forget the harshness of her past. Days. She remembered the trader's rough hands, the harsh words, the endless days of toil. She had been taught that freedom was an illusion, that kindness always carried a price: breath. Even now, walking beside a man who seemed genuinely concerned for her, she could not completely shake the fear that something would go wrong. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly, her voice almost a whisper. The cowboy glanced at her but did not stop walking. "Because it's the right thing," he said simply. "You didn't ask for this life, and you deserve a chance to live it." His words were steady, without expectation, without judgment. Breath. They were not grand or dramatic, but they carried weight because they were sincere. The young woman thought about these words. They were different from anything she had ever heard. She wanted to believe them, but a part of her remained cautious, remembering the many times promises had been broken. By the time the cabin appeared on a small rise ahead, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. It was a modest place, built from weathered wood and stone, but it had a sense of shelter and safety that she had never known. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, and the quiet of the surrounding land made it seem like a sanctuary far from the world's cruelty. The cowboy led her to the door, and she hesitated at the threshold. She wanted to step inside, but also feared what it meant. Inside, she would have to face freedom, responsibility, and the unfamiliar. The cowboy noticed her hesitation. He knelt slightly to meet her eyes. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said. "Take your time." "This is your space, not mine." She studied his face, searching for any hint of deception, but found none. Slowly, she stepped inside. The cabin was small but tidy, with a bed, a fireplace, and a table with a few chairs. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and herbs, a warmth that made her shoulders relax slightly. She looked around, realizing that this was the first place in her life where she could choose how to live, even in small ways. Days passed, and the cowboy did not rush her. He offered food, water, and quiet conversation, allowing her to adjust at her own pace. She learned how to cook simple meals over the fire, how to fetch water from the nearby stream, and how to tend the small garden outside. Each small task felt both strange and empowering. She discovered that freedom was not just about leaving the traders, it was about learning to take care of herself, making decisions and understanding that her choices mattered.
The cowboy's presence was steady and reassuring, but never controlling.
He guided her only when she asked, and sometimes simply by showing that he trusted her instincts. At night, the young woman would sit by the fire, staring into the flames, thinking about the life she had left behind. She remembered her family, the people she had loved and lost, and the harsh lessons she had been forced to learn. Tears sometimes came quietly, but she let them fall without shame. The cowboy never pried but would sit nearby, a silent guardian, allowing her grief to have space. Over time, she began to speak more, telling him small pieces of her story, testing whether his care was real. Each time she shared, he listened patiently, never interrupting or judging. The act of being heard, of having someone genuinely listen, became a new kind of healing for her. The cowboy, too, began to understand her in ways that words alone could not express. He saw her strength, her courage, and the sharp intelligence that had kept her alive through years of hardship. He understood that freedom alone could not erase the past, but that kindness, patience, and respect could help her rebuild a life worth living. Together, they created a quiet rhythm of days, work, rest, and shared silence, where trust slowly replaced fear, and hope began to grow in small, steady ways. Yet, even as she began to feel safer, the young woman could not ignore the lingering fear of her past. She knew that the traders or others who saw her as property might come looking, and that freedom could be fragile. Sometimes when the wind howled through the cabin, she would wake in the night, heart racing, convinced that danger had returned. Each time the cowboy would quietly assure her, his calm presence a shield against panic. Slowly she learned to balance vigilance with trust, realizing that fear could be managed even if it never disappeared completely. Weeks passed, and with each day her confidence grew. She learned to trust not only the cowboy but herself. She discovered small joys, a song carried on the wind, the taste of fresh water from the stream, the warmth of the sun on her face. She realized that life could be gentle, even after years of cruelty. The cowboy never demanded gratitude or obedience. His care was steady, consistent, and without expectation. And in this quiet shared life, a bond began to form, not one of ownership or power, but of mutual respect and understanding. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, the young woman finally spoke words she had not dared to say before. I never thought I would have a place like this, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The cowboy smiled softly. You've earned it, he said. This is yours, and you can make it what you want. Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Ooh. She had survived the harshest trials of her past, and now she faced the future with a strength she had not known she possessed. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of possibility. Life was uncertain, yes, and challenges remained, but she had the freedom to face them on her own terms. The journey ahead would require courage, patience, and resilience, but she knew that she was not alone. His respect and his unwavering patience had given her more than safety. They had given her hope. and hope, she realized, could be as powerful as freedom itself. Desperation. As night fell over the plains, the cabin glowed softly in the fading light, a small haven in a vast, unpredictable world. The young woman sat by the fire, thinking of all she had endured and all that lay ahead. She understood now that freedom was not something that could be given or bought. It was something she had to embrace, step by step, with courage and trust. And with that understanding came a sense of peace, fragile but real, as the first stars appeared in the sky, shining like distant promises of a life worth living. The days that followed brought both comfort and challenge. Life at the cabin was quiet but not easy. The young Apache woman discovered that freedom came with responsibilities she had never known before. Each morning, she rose with the sun to fetch water from the stream, tend the small garden, and gather firewood. At first, every task felt overwhelming. Her muscles ached in ways they had not before, and her hands were raw from labor she had not been used to.
Yet she found satisfaction in completing these chores, in seeing the fruits of her own work.
The cabin, which had once seemed like a foreign place, slowly began to feel like home. The cowboy was always nearby, but never controlling. Desperate understood the importance of letting her find her own rhythm. Sometimes he would quietly join her, lifting a heavy log or showing her how to strengthen a fence, but he never did anything without asking. His presence was steady, like a rock beside a river, and she began to realize that trust could grow when it was allowed to develop naturally. Still, she remained cautious. Her past had taught her that danger could appear unexpectedly, and she could not yet fully relax. One afternoon, as she worked in the garden, she noticed movement in the distance. Her body tensed immediately, instincts honed from years of fear taking over. She froze, listening intently. The cowboy approached quietly, noticing her unease. "What is it?" he asked gently. "Desk." She pointed toward the horizon where a small group of riders appeared, kicking up dust as they came closer. Her heart raced, and she felt the familiar spike of fear. Could it be the traitors? Could they have come to reclaim her? The cowboy stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Stay calm," he said. "Let's see who they are before worrying." As the riders drew near, they turned out to be harmless travelers looking for food and water. The young woman felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment at her reaction. She realized that even though she was free, her mind still carried the scars of captivity. The cowboy noticed the flicker of emotion on her face and offered a small smile. "It's okay," he said. "You're allowed to be afraid. You're allowed to feel." His words carried more weight than any action. They reassured her that her emotions were valid, that fear did not make her weak. The weeks turned into months, and the young woman began to adapt to her new life. She learned how to cook meals over the fire, bake bread, and preserve vegetables from the garden. She discovered the joy of simple pleasures, the sound of birds at dawn, the taste of fresh water, the warmth of sunlight on her face. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, strengthened her confidence. She began to speak more openly with the cowboy, sharing stories from her past and asking questions about the world beyond the plains. Slowly, she realized that she could form connections without fear of being used or harmed. Yet, life was not without struggle. The young woman still had nightmares, memories of harsh treatment that invaded her sleep. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and shaking. The cowboy would sit quietly beside her, offering a steady presence, never pushing her to speak until she was ready. Patience allowed her to confront the past on her own terms, to face the pain without being overwhelmed by it. Over time, the nightmares became less frequent, and she began to wake with a sense of hope rather than dread. One day, as she walked along the stream, she found a small injured bird struggling to fly. Its wing was bent awkwardly, and it chirped softly in distress. The young woman knelt carefully, feeling a deep empathy for the creature. She brought it back to the cabin, cleaned its wound, and fashioned a splint for its wing. The cowboy watched silently, impressed by her gentle touch and determination. "You have a kind heart," he said softly. "Narration." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. She had never thought of herself that way, never believed that kindness could coexist with survival. But in that moment she realized that her ability to care for something small and fragile was a reflection of her own strength. As the seasons changed, the young woman grew stronger in body and spirit. Dispense. She learned to ride a horse, shoot a bow, and recognize the signs of weather and wildlife. The cowboy taught her skills, but always with respect for her autonomy. She began to understand that true freedom was not just about escaping captivity. It was about learning to live fully, to make choices, and to face challenges with courage. Each lesson brought a sense of accomplishment, reinforcing the belief that she could survive and thrive on her own terms. Despite the progress she was making, the young woman could not completely escape the shadow of her past. Rumors occasionally reached the cabin, stories of traders moving through the area, searching for captives or claiming property. Each time, her heart tightened with fear. She knew that freedom was fragile, that it could be threatened at any moment. But with the cowboys' guidance and support, she learned to prepare without panic. They reinforced the cabin, practiced safety measures, and planned escape routes. These precautions were not oppressive, they were empowering. She was learning to take control of her life, rather than being controlled by fear. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the young woman reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the day the cowboy had paid for her freedom, the fear she had felt, and the skepticism that had held her back. Now she felt a cautious optimism, a sense that she could face the world with resilience and courage. She had learned that trust was not about giving up control. It was about finding people who respected your strength and allowed it to grow. The cowboy had shown her that kindness could exist without expectation, and that freedom was most meaningful when paired with understanding and respect. The bond between the two grew steadily, not from obligation or dependency, but from shared experiences and mutual respect. The young woman began to see the cowboy as a partner, someone who walked beside her rather than ahead or behind. They shared stories around the fire, worked together in the fields, and supported each other in the fields and supported each other in silence. This partnership was new to her, a delicate balance of independence and connection, and she cherished it deeply. One day, while walking through the woods to gather firewood, the young woman stumbled upon a small clearing filled with wildflowers. Oh, she paused, overwhelmed by the beauty and tranquility. For the first time, she felt a sense of wonder and peace, untainted by fear or obligation. The cowboy approached quietly, noticing her awe. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She nodded, a smile breaking across her face. In that moment, she realized that life could hold moments of joy, even after years of hardship. The world was not only a place of struggle, it could also be a place of healing and beauty. As the days passed, the young woman began to dream of the future. She imagined a life where she could explore, learn, and grow without fear. She thought about helping others who had suffered like she had, sharing her knowledge and strength. These dreams were tentative, fragile, but they gave her purpose and direction. She understood that healing was not just about surviving, but about building a life worth living, one choice at a time.
Even as she embraced this new life, the young woman never forgot the lessons of her past.
She carried with her the memory of hardship, using it as a guide to navigate the challenges ahead. She learned that strength was not the absence of fear, but the courage to act despite it. She discovered that freedom was not simply given, it was earned through patience, effort, and understanding. And she realized that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt with care, respect, and time. By the time the first snow of winter fell, the young woman had transformed in ways she could not have imagined. She was stronger, wiser, and more confident. The cabin no longer felt like a shelter from the world. It felt like a home she had helped create, a space where she could exist fully and freely. The cowboy's guidance and patience had allowed her to grow, but it was her own determination, courage, and resilience that had truly shaped her journey. One quiet evening, as they sat by the fire, the young woman looked at the cowboy and spoke softly. "I never thought I could feel safe or happy."
He nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "You deserve it," he replied simply.
"You've earned it, and you've made it real." She felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and newfound confidence. She knew that the journey was far from over, but she also knew that she had the strength and wisdom to face whatever came next. In the stillness of the night, with the snow falling gently outside, the young woman allowed herself to feel hope for the first time in years. She had faced fear, survived hardship, and learned to trust. She had discovered the beauty of life, the power of kindness, and the meaning of freedom. And as she looked at the cowboy, a quiet understanding passed between them. They were no longer simply protector and protected, but partners in a journey of growth, resilience, and discovery. The world beyond the cabin remained uncertain, but for the first time the young woman felt ready to meet it. She had faced the struggle of her past and emerged stronger, wiser, and more courageous. And she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with determination, hope, and the knowledge that she was no longer alone.
Winter was fading, and the first signs of spring were appearing across the plains.
The snow had melted, leaving soft green shoots pushing through the earth. The young Apache woman had grown stronger and more confident over the months. But the past has a way of returning when least expected. One morning, while gathering water from the stream, she noticed footprints in the soft mud. Fresh, hurried, and unfamiliar. Her heart skipped a beat. Fear returned, sharp and sudden, reminding her that freedom was still fragile. She quickly called the cowboy over, her voice trembling though she tried to keep it steady. The cowboy knelt beside her, examining the footprints carefully. "Looks like someone passed through recently," he said quietly. "We should be cautious, but don't panic. We'll figure it out together." The young woman nodded, though her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. The past she had struggled to escape seemed to be approaching, threatening to undo the sense of safety she had fought so hard to build. Together they returned to the cabin, taking care to secure it and check the surroundings. Every noise, every rustle of leaves, set her nerves on edge. Over the next few days, small signs of intruders appeared. Items that had been left outside were moved. A horse's hoof print appeared near the edge of the property, and distant voices carried faintly on the wind. The young woman could feel her old fears resurfacing. The fear of capture, the fear of losing control, the fear that her life of hardship might return. But this time, she was not alone. The cowboy stayed calm, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her anxiety. He taught her how to observe without panicking, how to track movements, and how to protect the cabin without giving in to fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, the intruders appeared in the distance, a group of men on horseback, rough and determined, moving toward the cabin. Her heart raced, but she did not freeze as she might have months ago. She had learned to act, to think, and to prepare. The cowboy quickly organized their defenses, explaining in calm, clear instructions how they could stay safe. They worked together, barricading doors, hiding valuables, and positioning themselves so that they could observe the intruders without being seen. The young woman realized that she was no longer powerless. She had skills, awareness, and courage. The men approached the cabin, shouting and demanding entry. The young woman could hear the fear in their voices, a cruel echo of the world she had once known. One of them yelled, "We know she's here! She belongs to us!" But the cowboy stood firm, his voice strong and unwavering. "She is not yours," he said. "Leave, and you will be unharmed."
Try to take her, and you will answer to me.
His words carried authority and resolve, and the young woman felt a surge of admiration and trust. She knew he would not fail her, but she also realized that she had a role to play in protecting herself.
As the confrontation continued, the young woman quietly observed, noticing weaknesses in the intruder's approach. She had learned to read people, to sense fear and hesitation, and to act with careful timing. When one man tried to circle around the cabin, she quietly moved to a higher vantage point and raised an alarm, startling him and alerting the cowboy. Together they managed to keep the intruders at bay. The young woman felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. This was the first time she had actively defended herself, and the feeling was empowering. The standoff lasted through the afternoon. The intruders, frustrated and unable to breach the cabin's defenses, finally retreated, disappearing into the distant hills. The young woman and the cowboy stood together, breathing heavily, hearts racing, yet filled with a sense of triumph. She realized that her past, while persistent, could be faced and overcome. The cowboy placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You did well," he said. "You stayed calm. You helped protect yourself, and you learned to trust your instincts. That is strength." His praise was quiet, but it meant more than words could convey. In the days that followed, the young woman reflected on what had happened, but she understood that freedom was not simply the absence of captors. It was the ability to act, to defend herself, and to make choices even in the face of danger. She realized that the cabin, once a symbol of refuge, had become a place of empowerment, a space where she could grow stronger, both physically and emotionally. The cowboy continued to guide her, offering lessons in vigilance, strategy, and self-reliance, but always with respect for her autonomy. Their bond deepened through the experience. The young woman began to see the cowboy not just as a protector, but as a partner. They shared responsibilities, made decisions together, and supported one another in moments of fear and uncertainty. She realized that trust was not a single act, but a continuous process, built through actions, consistency, and respect. She had learned that while the world could be dangerous, she did not have to face it alone. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, the young woman ventured beyond the immediate safety of the cabin to gather herbs and wild plants. The cowboy accompanied her at a distance, giving her space to explore and make decisions on her own. She marveled at the beauty of the world around her, the delicate flowers, the sound of a bubbling stream, the warmth of sunlight on her skin. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of peace that was not fleeting or fragile. She was learning that freedom was not only about survival, but also about appreciating the small joys life could offer. As the days passed, the young woman continued to face challenges, both external and internal. Memories of her past captivity still haunted her, and the fear of intruders never completely disappeared. Yet each time she confronted these fears, she grew stronger. She learned to act with confidence, to rely on her instincts, and to trust in her own abilities. The cowboy remained a guide and a companion, but she discovered that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined. One afternoon, while exploring a nearby ridge, she came across evidence of other travelers, signs of life beyond their cabin, people moving through the land, and hints of stories untold. The discovery filled her with curiosity and a desire to learn more about the world she had never truly known. She realized that her freedom was not just about escaping captivity. It was about the opportunity to explore, to learn, and to grow. The cowboy encouraged her curiosity, sharing knowledge about the land, its dangers, and its beauty. while always respecting her ability to make her own choices. The young woman began to take on more responsibilities at the cabin, managing the garden, caring for animals, and maintaining their supplies. Each task required skill, patience, and problem-solving, and she found satisfaction in mastering them. She understood that freedom was not passive. It demanded effort, decision-making, and resilience. But she also recognized that her efforts were meaningful. She was building a life of her own, one where she had control over her destiny. Despite the progress she had made, the young woman never forgot the lessons of caution. She continued to observe the horizon, watch for signs of danger, and maintain the defenses of the cabin. She knew that life could be unpredictable, but she also knew that she was no longer powerless. She had learned to face fear with courage, to trust her instincts, and to act decisively when necessary. And she had learned that she could rely on the cowboy not as a savior but as a partner, someone who respected her strength and supported her growth. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of pink and gold, the young woman sat by the fire, reflecting on her journey. She thought about the days of fear, the struggles she had endured, and the courage she had discovered within herself. She realized that the challenges she faced had shaped her into a stronger, wiser person. The cowboy sat beside her, offering quiet companionship and understanding. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and trust, knowing that their bond was built on mutual respect, shared experience, and genuine care. The world beyond the cabin remained uncertain, but the young woman no longer felt helpless. She had faced danger, survived threats, and learned to protect herself. Perhaps the power of trust, the importance of patience, and the value of courage. And she had learned that freedom was not just a gift, it was a responsibility, a choice, and a journey that required constant effort and awareness. In the quiet of the night, as stars filled the sky, the young woman allowed herself to feel hope and determination. She knew that the path ahead would hold new challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength, skills, and support to face them. Her journey was far from over, but she had proven to herself that she could survive, thrive, and grow in a world that had once sought to control her. And as she looked at the cowboy, she understood that together they could face whatever the future held, with courage, trust, and the knowledge that they were not alone. Spring had fully arrived, bringing with it warmth and life across the plains. The days were longer, and the air smelled of fresh grass and wildflowers. The young Apache woman had grown in strength, courage, and confidence over the months since she had left the town. What had once been a fearful and cautious girl was now a young woman capable of facing challenges with determination and wisdom. She had learned to trust, not blindly, but with careful awareness. Peace. She had learned that freedom was more than escaping captivity. It was about living fully, making choices, and taking responsibility for her own life.
Life at the cabin had settled into a rhythm that was both peaceful and productive.
The young woman took pride in her work, tending the garden, cooking meals, and caring for the animals. Each task, no matter how simple, was a small victory, a proof of her independence. She had learned to ride horses confidently, to track animals, and to read the land for signs of weather or danger. Her body was strong, her mind alert, and her heart open to the possibility of happiness. The cowboy had been her guide, her partner, and her friend, never pushing, never demanding, but always present, steady, and patient. One morning, while walking through the field to check the perimeter, she noticed fresh tracks in the dirt. Instantly, memories of past threats returned, but instead of panic, she felt a sense of readiness. She calmly observed the tracks, noting their size, direction, and pace. The cowboy joined her, watching as she explained what she had learned about tracking. "You've become skilled," he said quietly. "I never doubted you could do it, but it's impressive to see how far you've come."
A small smile appeared on her face.
She realized that her journey had transformed her, giving her not only freedom but the knowledge and strength to protect herself and her life. The days passed with a mixture of routine and small adventures. Together they explored nearby hills, fished in streams, and occasionally traveled to distant towns to trade supplies. Each experience brought new lessons and strengthened their partnership. The young woman began to realize that her life was no longer defined by fear or survival, but by choices, experiences, and connections. She could now imagine a future that was not limited by the hardships of her past. The plains, once a place of danger, now felt like a canvas upon which she could paint her own life. Despite the peace she had found, there were moments when her past returned in memory or in small reminders. The way the traders had looked at her, the harsh words she had endured, the nights of fear and isolation. These memories were painful, but they no longer controlled her. She had learned to face them, to acknowledge the pain, and to use it as a source of strength. Each time she remembered, she grew stronger, more resilient, and more determined to live life on her own terms. One afternoon, while tending the garden, she noticed a group of children playing in the distance. They laughed and ran freely, unburdened by the fears she had carried for so long. She felt a pang of longing for the innocence she had never fully experienced. The cowboy watched her quietly, understanding the depth of her emotions. "One day," he said softly, "you could help them, teach them, guide them. You have strength and wisdom they could learn from." The thought filled her with hope. She realized that her experiences, painful as they had been, could now be used to help others. Her past had not been wasted. It had prepared her for a life where she could make a difference. As spring turned into summer, the young woman began to take on new projects around the cabin. She built a small fence around the garden to protect it from wildlife, learned to repair tools, and even helped mend the roof of the cabin. Each task challenged her skills and patience, but she faced them with determination and careful thought. She realized that her life was now hers to shape, and every effort she made was an investment in her own future. The cowboy offered guidance when needed but allowed her to take the lead, reinforcing her confidence and independence. The bond between the young woman and the cowboy had deepened over time. They had shared fear, triumph, work, and quiet moments of reflection. They no longer needed many words to communicate. A glance, a gesture, or a shared task spoke volumes. The young woman realized that she felt safe, respected, and valued in a way she had never known before. Trust, which had once seemed impossible, had grown into a foundation for a meaningful partnership. She had learned that relationships could be built on respect, care, and understanding, not control or fear. One day, while exploring a nearby stream, she found a young bird struggling to leave its nest. She gently helped it back, watching as it regained its strength and flew into the sky. The moment filled her with a profound sense of hope and accomplishment. She realized that her own life was similar. Once fragile and uncertain, now strong and capable of soaring. The cowboy, observing her, nodded approvingly. "You've grown," he said simply, "not just in strength but in heart and spirit." She felt a deep sense of gratitude. She understood that her journey had not been easy, but it had been necessary for her growth and freedom. Summer brought new opportunities and challenges. Occasionally, travelers passed near the cabin and the young woman began to interact with them, offering help, guidance, or simply conversation. She discovered that sharing her experiences and skills could benefit others, and it gave her a sense of purpose beyond herself. She felt empowered knowing that her life, once dictated by others, could now influence the lives of those around her in positive ways. Each interaction strengthened her confidence and reinforced the value of her freedom. The young woman also began to reflect on the cowboy's role in her life. She realized that he had never sought to control or own her. He had simply offered support, guidance, and respect. This, he had paid for her freedom without expectation, allowed her to grow at her own pace, and treated her as an equal rather than property. The lessons she had learned from him extended beyond survival. They were lessons in kindness, respect, and the power of human decency. Narration. The true strength included compassion and the courage to act for the good of others. As the summer sun burned high, the young woman faced her final challenge, accepting the full reality of her freedom. She had lived in fear for so long that freedom itself felt unfamiliar. She realized that she could make choices without fear of punishment, that her life was hers to direct, and that her past did not define her. It was a powerful realization, one that filled her with both joy and a little apprehension. She understood that freedom was not simply an absence of danger, but an active state of living with courage, responsibility, and hope. One quiet evening, as the sun set in brilliant colors, the young woman and the cowboy sat outside the cabin, watching the sky. "I never imagined life could be like this," she said softly. "I never thought I would feel safe, happy, or free."
The cowboy smiled gently. "Oh, you."
He glances around in despair. "You earned it," he said, "and you've made it real." Burrs. You faced your fears, learned your strength, and grew into someone remarkable.
She looked at him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude, respect, and connection.
The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led her to a life she could finally call her own. The young woman understood that her story was not just about escape or survival. It was about growth, resilience, and the power of trust. She had faced cruelty, fear, and uncertainty, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable. She had learned to trust herself and others, to act with courage, and to embrace the opportunities that life offered. And she had learned that freedom, once gained, was not a gift to be taken lightly. It was a responsibility, a chance to live fully and meaningfully. In the months that followed, the young woman continued to thrive. She maintained the cabin, cared for animals, explored the land, and helped travelers along the way. Her confidence grew, and so did her sense of purpose. She realized that her life could now be a force for good, that the lessons of her past could guide her decisions, and that she had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Pride in the person she had become, a person who had faced fear, embraced freedom, and learned to live fully. As summer faded into autumn, the young woman stood on a hill overlooking the cabin and the plains beyond. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The fear, the struggle, the courage, and the trust. She realized that her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Brave girl to a strong, independent woman capable of shaping her own destiny, and she knew that this transformation was not complete. It was an ongoing journey, one that would continue as she lived her life with courage, compassion, and hope. Finally, she turned to the cowboy, who had stood by her side through every challenge. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He nodded, a quiet smile on his face.
"You did all the hard work yourself," he replied.
"I only helped you see what was already inside you." She realized the truth of his words. Her freedom, her strength, and her life were hers. The cowboy had offered guidance and kindness, but the courage, resilience, and wisdom belonged to her alone. With the wind in her hair and the sun setting behind the hills, the young Apache woman felt a sense of peace she had never known. Her past would always be a part of her, but it no longer controlled her. She had faced the trials of her life, learned her own strength, and embraced the possibilities of the future. She had discovered that freedom was not simply the absence of captivity, but the presence of courage, hope, and choice. And she knew that no matter what lay ahead, she would face it with the strength and wisdom she had earned through her journey.